global attention economy is rapidly closing the window for true wealth creation. If a professional still believes that grinding for 14 hours a day is the path to the top, their biological hardware is already failing. The top 1% do not work harder. They manipulate the exact laws of thermodynamics, engineering frictionless environments where monumental progress requires absolutely zero willpower. By the conclusion of this clinical analysis, the highly classified neurological protocol to stop grinding and start dominating will be fully exposed. Ignoring this clinical data guarantees the organism a permanent lifetime of exhausted mediocrity. Society worships the illusion of extreme effort. The modern worker is conditioned to believe that success is directly proportional to the amount of suffering endured during the workday. This dangerous ideology, commonly known as hustle culture, equates long hours with high status. But clinical neuroscience and evolutionary biology dictate a completely different reality. The human brain was fundamentally not designed to endure endless, high-friction cognitive labor. Throughout human history, monumental expansion did not occur through supreme, exhausting effort, but through geographical and biological lines of least resistance. Agriculture and civilization spread rapidly across horizontal latitudes because the climate remained consistent, requiring almost zero adaptive effort from early humans. Biology fundamentally favors the path of least resistance. Energy is a precious, finite biological resource. The central nervous system is hardwired to conserve it whenever possible. It is human nature to follow the law of least effort, which states that when deciding between two similar options, the organism will naturally gravitate toward the option that requires the lowest caloric expenditure. Elite performers understand this biological absolute. Average professionals fight against it. The traditional worker believes that forcing the brain to focus through brute strength will eventually build an empire. They sit at chaotic desks, bombarded by digital stimuli, and rely on raw discipline to execute complex tasks. They view exhaustion as a badge of honor, but biology does not reward unnecessary suffering. Forcing constant effort in a high-friction environment does not optimize the brain, it actively destroys it. The organism is simply burning premium metabolic fuel to overcome environmental resistance, leaving zero energy for actual fluid intelligence. Why hard work destroys fluid IQ? The illusion of the 14-hour grind completely shatters when examining the microscopic energy demands of the cerebral cortex. Every cognitive action, every decision, and every attempt to ignore a distraction requires a measurable amount of physical energy. When a professional attempts to grind through a chaotic, unoptimized environment, they rely entirely on the prefrontal cortex to maintain discipline. This region of the brain is the biological center for willpower and impulse control. However, it is extremely inefficient and burns through massive amounts of glucose and ATP. Willpower is not an infinite mental muscle. It is a highly volatile, rapidly depleting chemical resource. When the organism forces hard work against massive environmental friction, the brain must violently constantly suppress competing urges. The metabolic cost of this suppression is catastrophic. By the fourth hour of brute force labor, the brain's energy reserves are completely hollowed out. To survive the artificial stress of the modern workday, the central nervous system begins to shut down non-essential functions. Fluid intelligence, lateral thinking, and deep memory consolidation are immediately sacrificed to keep the organism awake. The individual physically loses the capacity to solve complex problems. They assume they are just tired, entirely unaware that their reliance on raw effort has caused an acute, temporary drop in their actual IQ. The worker remains at the desk for another 10 hours, but their output becomes mathematically worthless. They are trading highly valuable neurological health for the mere illusion of productivity. The neurobiology of false progress. A block of ice at 31 degrees looks completely stable. 1 degree hotter and it violently collapses. This is exactly how the central nervous system responds to the chronic friction of working blindly without leverage. Tragedy of the modern hustle is that it perfectly mimics the sensation of achievement while delivering zero actual growth. There is a profound biological difference between being in motion and taking action. Motion consists of planning, strategizing, organizing files, and answering trivial emails. It feels like work, it looks like work, but motion never produces a final outcome. Action is the only behavior that delivers a tangible result. The human brain easily falls into the trap of constant motion because motion provides a cheap, artificial dopamine hit without the risk of failure. When the organism is exhausted from forcing effort against high friction, it naturally retreats from difficult, high-leverage actions. Instead, the dysregulated nervous system seeks the easiest possible task to maintain the illusion of progress. The professional spends 8 hours violently shifting paper clips, restructuring spreadsheets, and attending pointless meetings. This behavior is a neurobiological scam. The brain registers the completion of these tiny, irrelevant tasks and secretes microdoses of dopamine. The individual feels falsely satisfied. They arrive at the end of a grueling 14-hour shift completely drained, firmly believing they worked hard. In reality, they accomplished absolutely nothing of value. They simply spun the wheels of their own biological machine until the engine overheated. The dopamine-driven feedback loop of the rat race keeps the worker trapped in a permanent state of busy mediocrity, entirely blinding them to the fact that their massive effort is yielding zero compounding returns. The biological cost of the rat race. Attempting to escape this cycle by simply trying harder is the biological equivalent of pouring gasoline on a burning house to put out the fire. The human brain evolved in an immediate return environment. In the wild, actions delivered instant survival outcomes. But the modern corporate structure is a delayed return environment. The monumental effort exerted today will not yield a financial or status reward for months or even years. The primitive brain fundamentally lacks the architecture to process this delay. It violently rejects the concept of long-term suffering for an invisible future reward. When a professional forces extreme daily effort without immediate biological feedback, the brain interprets the situation as a chronic survival threat. It sounds a terrifying neurochemical alarm. Cortisol levels spike. The autonomic nervous system is permanently locked into a fight-or-flight state. Over months and years, this constant, unrewarded friction acts as a literal acid on the central nervous system. The relentless stress actively blocks the lymphatic system from initiating its critical cleaning protocols during sleep. Toxic beta-amyloid plaque pools heavily inside the cellular walls. The organism ages at an accelerated, terrifying rate. The professional sacrifices their physical health, their endocrine balance, and their neuroplasticity, all to serve a toxic cultural narrative that demands endless visible suffering. They are playing a rigged game. The ultimate cost of the rat race is not just financial stagnation. It is the total, irreversible destruction of the biological machine. Why amateurs rely on willpower. This horrific cognitive decay dictates all external behavior, and that behavior actively destroys the absolute foundation of human leverage. The amateur relies on willpower to survive the day. The professional engineers an environment that makes success biologically inevitable. Trying to pump up motivation to stick with a grueling 14-hour schedule is like trying to force high-pressure water through a garden hose that is bent in the middle. The amateur grips the hose, violently squeezing and forcing the water out through sheer physical strength. They pride themselves on the struggle. They worship the tension. Meanwhile, the elite performer simply walks over to the hose, removes the bend, and lets the water flow effortlessly. Relying on discipline is a trauma response. It is an admission that the environment is hostile to the desired goal. The people with the greatest apparent self-control are actually the ones who need to use it the least. They do not possess heroic willpower. They simply spend significantly less time in tempting, high-friction situations. The global elite view discipline as a systemic failure. If a task requires intense motivation to begin, the system is fundamentally broken. Amateurs constantly fight against their own neurochemical desires. They battle the urge to scroll social media. They fight the urge to sleep. They struggle against the friction of a poorly designed life. This constant internal warfare mathematically guarantees eventual failure. No human organism can permanently out-willpower its own biology. Eventually, the prefrontal cortex collapses, the fatigue takes over, and the individual violently reverts to their lowest baseline of behavior. Engineering the ultimate leverage. The ultimate biological leverage is not raw effort. The ultimate leverage is environmental architecture and the absolute elimination of cognitive friction. True systemic domination occurs entirely in the physical and digital design of the workspace, far before the actual labor begins. To completely halt the massive loss of metabolic energy and reverse the illusion of work, the organism must manually inject the third law of behavior change into its reality. Make it easy. The secret to zero-effort success is addition by subtraction. It is the ruthless clinical removal of every single obstacle that stands between the brain and the execution of deep work. Elite performers treat their environment as their most sacred biological asset. They engineer their daily routines to automate focus. They construct physical realities where failure is mathematically impossible. If a smartphone causes friction, it is permanently removed from the room. If a specific software triggers a distraction loop, the internet router is literally placed on an automatic timer to shut down. They prime the environment for future use. They reset the room. They make the bad habits practically impossible to execute and the highly lucrative habits entirely frictionless. Working hard is a biological trap designed for the masses. Mastering the rare art of zero-friction engineering actively protects the brain's most valuable resources. The choice between endless, exhausting mediocrity and effortless long-term mental dominance dictates the entire future of the human organism. True elite status is achieved by maximizing leverage, not by maximizing suffering. The clinical optimization of the environment allows for hyperdense periods of cognitive labor that require zero willpower to initiate. The individual who masters this biological reality will always outlast, outperform, and outsmart the professional trapped in the chaotic cycle of endless grinding. The environment must be brutally controlled. The preservation of ATP, the lowering of chronic cortisol, and the physical restructuring of the workspace are the true, undeniable metrics of success. The biological machine must be guided by architecture, or it will inevitably destroy itself through effort.